Without any further ado, I'm going to welcome today's star, Otisa. She's an HR systems strategist, and she's here to entertain us today. Otisa.
Thank you, Michael. Hi, friends, virtual and actually in person. I'm really excited to talk today. I'm in a mic, so this is going to be funny, me walking around, even though you can clearly hear me here. So this will be entertaining for both of us. So today you're here about how to increase employee engagement in a post-pandemic world, also navigating the future, right? As we all know, employee engagement has completely changed before 2020 and how it is now. How many people enjoyed employee engagement activities before the pandemic? Raise your hand. Okay, how many have enjoyed employee engagement activities currently after the pandemic? Raise your hand. As you can see, no, nobody enjoys employee engagement activities. So the challenge is already in of itself. So now we have to get creative on how we're going to do that in a post-pandemic world. So today we're going to talk about different ways, not only CEOs and business owners, but if you're an employee yourself and you have some different ideas, or you're a consultant that works with nonprofits or small businesses, you're going to learn different ways to navigate a hybrid workplace, different strategies to increase employee engagement, and then just to learn about the role of inclusion and equity when you're trying to foster an inclusive work environment. Okay, so here I talk about defining inclusion and equity. I have definitions that we're going to go over in a second. I might ask someone to read them. Prepare yourself. I also am going to talk about how you can build an inclusive culture in a work environment. I think you hear that a lot. It's a buzzword on how to create an inclusive work environment. People forget that it's actually a lot of work. It means learning more about the culture at the organization currently, where they're trying to head, and also just different ways that they can start doing that now and different solutions for that. Big thing to think about is as you're trying to figure out different strategies and in increasing a workplace culture or fostering an inclusive culture is figuring out what organizations are currently successful in this. I think it's important to do your own research, figure out what's working, what's not working, what you would like, what you don't like before trying something new yourself. So it's good to take time to figure out what's being done that you want to try in your own organization or company. The first definition, friends, it's a big one. But this is my favorite. It's from a framework from Tina C. Nilsson and Lisa Kopinski, who wrote an awesome series of books called Inclusion Nudges. In these books, they talk about different ways where you can actually practice diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice in your organization or company. They give you specific action steps that they call nudges. So I like their definitions, and so I'm going to ask a volunteer to read, because it's not my show. Today is about all of us. So can I get a volunteer to read the first definition about equity? Go forth, Hillary.
Equity, the fairness frame for the mixed activity, is about ensuring that all people have equal access to opportunities and fair treatment, and ensuring elimination of discriminatory practices, systems, laws, policies, social norms, and cultural traditions. Equity encompasses a balancing of power and correcting where inequality exists. It is also about patterns of behavior and processes developed and used which may be continuing inequality. Within some contexts, equity may have a legal mandate attached to achieving it, along with penalties for not. The intent of equity is fairness to all.
Thank you very much, Hillary. Going to have another volunteer to read the next one. Poor Rachel back there. I'm sorry to bother you, but you're going to have to scroll up. It's a fancy PowerPoint. Yeah. Perfect. Behind you, our dear friend, Megan, please read the definition of inclusion for me.
Inclusion, welcoming and applying the mix. Inclusion is focused on fostering the structure, system, processes, culture, behavior, and mindset that embrace and respect all people and all our diversity. It embraces all people. Inclusion is about ensuring that diversity of knowledge, perspectives, information, and ideas are welcomed and being used. Inclusion is when we seek out diversity, when we challenge excluding norms and stereotypes, when we are open to others, and when we speak up. Inclusion is when all people are valued and able to participate and contribute to their fullest. Inclusion is welcoming and applying the mix to all of us.
Thank you so much, my dear. Yes, so have anyone seen these definitions this way before? Anyone? Is this new to anybody seeing it this way? I figured. So here in this slide deck, hopefully you'll get a copy. We'll figure that out later. But you can click to learn more about the authors of the book, Inclusion Nudges, and kind of their framework on how they look at diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. So we're talking about employee engagement. What I care about most is figuring out how, like, the intent of equity. So how fair is everything? Are you asking your staff for input when you're planning activities? Are you figuring out that's accessible to everyone? Are you doing virtual and in person? Are you doing retreats, and are you doing like your happy hours or potlucks or whatever? How are you trying to make sure that everyone has access to the different ways that you're trying to keep staff engaged? And not just doing the same thing over and over and over again because it's easy and you probably have a template for it already. So how can you mix things up a little bit? Inclusion, right? Also, how are you applying everything? How are folks feeling valued and being able to participate? Do you have a committee of staff that want to be part of planning the different activities or getting their feedback for the things you've already done? So this is a different way of kind of looking at how equity and inclusion are part of employee engagement. Inclusive culture. And I'm going to have another volunteer to read, because again, it's not my show. So can I get someone to read the first definition of what is an inclusive culture? It'll be right where it says "and inclusive." Who wants to volunteer? We'll hand you a mic. Yes. What's your name?
My name is Pablo.
Thank you, Pablo.
So an inclusive culture indicates a climate in which respect, equity, and positive recognition of differences are all cultivated. Core values, do you want me to continue? Yeah.
Just that one, yeah.
Core values demonstrated in an inclusive culture are representation, receptivity, fairness, collaboration, and contribution.
Thank you very much, Pablo. Yes, and the next point just says it helps us see things from different perspectives. So when you're thinking about inclusive culture, what perspectives are included and who's not included? How can you make that change? How can you foster and encourage creativity, collaboration that can lead to innovation or lead to new ideas or lead to just folks coming together and learn more about each other? And create community that way. Some other ways to foster inclusive culture are establishing a sense of belonging for everyone, practicing empathy or empathetic leadership, and also focusing on helping one another thrive, not fit. When I do a lot of different trainings, I talk about the difference between fit and alignment. So how are folks aligning to the culture? How are folks aligning to the way you conduct work or how you are productive, your workflow? Not just about a perfect fit. So that's my little soapbox. But I try to direct folks to looking at alignment versus fit. I like reflection and discussion questions. So there's a few different reflection questions here, but what comes to mind when you see, read, and hear these definitions? How are you putting equity and inclusion into action in the workplace? What may be challenging in actualizing equity and inclusion? And what could this look like when designing employee engagement activities and events? Trust me, there's more things to come down the line. But can I get a volunteer to just pick a reflection question and share kind of what comes to mind when you reflect on some of the pieces we just mentioned about inclusive culture, equity, inclusion? So any volunteers who want to share anything before we keep going? And just raise your hand so we can give you a mic. Thank you.
So I love the idea of pulling people together and meeting people from different cultures and different backgrounds. Where I struggle is there still has to be some kind of norm for performance. So especially following COVID and people with high levels of anxiety and stuff, I'm compassionate to that, but when does the inclusion end because they're still very much an outlier?
It's a great question. I like how you answered and then gave me a question at the same time. Yeah, I think to me it kind of boils down to a few different things. I heard you talk about like anxiety, like folks trying to navigate coming back. Maybe if you have a hybrid work environment or you're doing more things in person, how are they going to navigate that? So first off, I think making sure that when you are hosting events, planning different things, keeping those things in mind. So I like, personally, I like icebreakers. I like questions. I like knowing what's happening because that way eases my anxiety. Is this going to be a listening moment? Is this going to be a discussion moment? Am I going to do networking, which, so draining, right? They kind of know what's happening. What's the plan? And how can you give them the information beforehand? Like you create an agenda, right? How can you give that to them in advance or just say, hey, make sure you bring X, Y, Z? also, this might be a little odd, but I'm playing with this idea as I do retreats for staff, is having spaciousness for folks to go outside and get some fresh air, or just have pauses or mindfulness breaks. And I build that into the structure of my retreats, because a lot of the times it can be very overwhelming to be around a lot of people at a time. And some folks might just need a break. So I try to build that into the agenda that I create for my events. And then lastly, making sure you're communicating the intent, the purpose behind what you're doing, and the expectations that you are setting, so they understand that this is part of the culture, and making sure that you're always kind of keeping that in the forefront. Was that helpful?
Thank you. Yeah.
Sweet. Anybody else? Any thoughts? Go forth. Grab a mic.
I don't know which of these fits under, but you were in the previous slide. You mentioned empathetic leadership, and I don't know. I guess I would say empathetic co-workership too. Our team is all virtual. It's really hard when you can't see people. When people don't want to socialize as much, and that feels like it presents a lot of challenges.
Is that a question in there, or just a statement?
I guess it's, yes, it's both. It is a statement. It is hard, and you seem wise and knowledgeable. So I'm hoping you.
Yeah, no, I'm just poking at you. Yeah, I see what you're saying. I think that it comes to virtual land, I like to call it Zoom land or virtual land. I think that it's easier to be disengaged because you can turn your camera off, you can multitask, you can do the dishes, you can hang out with your dog, you can do different things while you're online. But I think that it kind of goes back to being creative. Like I have some clients where we're coming up with different ideas. So, and it may sound very elementary what I'm about to say, but you'll be surprised that adults like activities like scavenger hunts. I know that sounds silly, but we would do a thing to get people like an icebreaker. We would say, hey, grab these 5 things, something that's purple, your favorite pen. Like we would just do that. Or they'd grab their pet and talk about their pet for the day. Like figure out ways to get people engaged in a virtual world. Just requires being just a little bit more creative and thinking of ways that folks can contribute, even though they're virtual. Or if you don't want cameras on, you can come up with different ways for folks to still be engaged. It just sitting down and writing different ideas and getting creative, or asking your staff, what are some different things you would like to do? Or here's some ideas that we have, what are your thoughts? And giving it a try. So I didn't give you a perfect answer, but that's kind of what comes to mind for me. How's that sound? Is that good? Is that helpful?
Yeah, I think with the idea of empathy and inclusion, part of the problem is in person it's easier to tell when somebody's feeling
Yes.
uncomfortable.
Yes.
And just sort of there's both, it's harder to tell, but also you don't want to, if somebody needs space, you want to give them space. And it's just harder to read
Online.
in a virtual environment.
100%. And I think it just requires asking more questions, checking in. I always say, hey, checking in, how are we doing? Like when I do virtual trainings, I say that probably 20 million times because I don't require them to have their camera on. So I just say, hey, checking in, how are we doing? How are we feeling? Do we need a break? Do we need this? Do you want to do an activity? I do a lot of reflection prompts, as you see, have them do that on their own for 10 minutes and then come back and share, because not everyone likes to just kind of popcorn. That makes people nervous. So I come up with different ways of facilitating the space. So I think it's a different facilitation practice with online.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there times you do require the camera to be on?
This may sound strange, not much, because here's the thing, life be living, things be happening. No, I'm just serious. Some people have their kids at home that's sick. Sometimes pets are literally sick. I've had that happen. Their dog had a hip surgery. It was a whole thing. So I've noticed that the folks that have the ability to turn their camera off, you'll be surprised that they actually are still engaged. The same thing with having a moderator on a chat. I have them put prompts in the chat. I have them, I just try to adjust accordingly, because if you make someone do things and you make it mandatory, you'll be surprised how engagement will go down. So if you say you have to have your camera on, how often are they in the chat asking questions or liking things? How often are they raising their hand? So I just say it's not required, but I do ask this of you. And I have a little housekeeping slide. I talk about agreements and things like that to get people to understand that I understand that you have things going on. you can still find a way in your own way to be engaged with us today. So if that means video's off and you're still listening, awesome. Cool. Hybrid work environment. I have a lot of clients where we talk a lot about hybrid work environments. Anyone here work in a hybrid work environment? Sweet. Do you all have a policy for a hybrid work environment? No? Okay. So here's the thing. A lot of my clients, they don't know where to start, and I tell them first to map out what a hybrid model even means to your organization or company, or how do you want to go about that in the workplace. I also tell them create a policy after you've designed that hybrid model so you can relay to your staff what's required and expected of them. So if you have a hybrid work environment yet you want them to come into the office 3 times a week, have that be a policy. Create a procedure on how you want them to do that and relay their schedule, or they have time off. Really important to have that mapped out in a policy. And the policy will change as the times change, so keep that in mind too. Also, how are you communicating these things? How are you letting them know here's the expectations of a hybrid work environment, and how are you going to be implementing this? I think it's really important to have that be a consistent way of you talking to your staff about this hybrid model, because they're going to have bajillions of questions that you never thought or were prepared for. They're going to ask you a lot about time off and how that relates to a hybrid work environment. So it's really great to have a consistent communication protocol or process with your team. And then lastly, maintaining team cohesion. So come up with different activities. You can do remote or in person. Also figure out a way to continue to nurture a sense of belonging in a hybrid workplace. Again, it's going to be require you to get kind of creative in different ways. I love icebreakers, huge icebreaker person. You're lucky I didn't make you do one today. I'm telling you, I got pages of different ones. I love them, and I love changing them up each time I meet with my clients and their teams. And then I ask their staff, like, what are some things you like to do? And I might create an icebreaker around some different commonalities that they have. So yeah, I could talk about this for hours, so we'll keep going. Oh, yeah, here, question for this section is, have you and your team implemented a hybrid work environment? What has that experience been thus far? And then what are the challenges that your team or organization has faced in adopting a hybrid model? And then what are some successes of a hybrid work environment? I can tell you a lot about failures, but let's not talk about that today. Curious in what your successes have been. So again, you can pick one of the questions to answer if you would like.
So one of the greatest things I saw come out of COVID is that you could see LA from the sky without the smog being in your way. And something that some people aren't realizing is that, you know, if you care about the environment, you literally could take cars off the road by not having people come in. I live in Colorado, don't we all? When there's a snow day, as long as the internet's fine, I'm fine. I don't have to worry about the wind taking my car away, because the wind here can do that. There was a tornado I found out the other day. Luckily, that I was fortunate enough to not have to deal with that. But sometimes our business goals for what we want to see in the world can line up with this. So I feel like the hybrid work environment can at least allow us to redefine and relook at some things that we took for granted that we can't change. Like we can just we can help climate change by having people work at home, and that's at the expense of perhaps reading body language. But I'm breathing easier.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I'm a solopreneur, so this isn't for me, but my clients, what I see is that there are certain departments that need to be, say, on the floor or in person, whereas other departments not so much. And what they struggle with is, why do they get special treatment and we don't? So would just love to hear your thoughts about the special treatment issue.
The special treatment issue. I think that, to me, it also comes down to communication, explaining the why, even though it may be obvious to the employer, but just explaining, then also making sure there's room for, when they're doing employee engagement, they may want to do more in person, because that way other folks feel that they're included as well. And to bridge that gap of us versus them, I think that will also be helpful. But I think it comes down to communication. Do they have a hybrid work environment policy? Do they have a protocol or procedure that they could roll out and explain, this is what we're doing? That way they understand this isn't just this team is so lucky they get to work from home, but it's part of their job that they're able to do that, but also to kind of figure out ways to bring them together so they feel like they actually are a team and it's not so siloed, if that makes sense.
I'm a solopreneur as well, so I see a lot of my clients have more accountability and also better mental health when they have a hybrid work environment, and not so much just the working from home, but actually the days that they have to go into the office because they get to be more social, have coworkers, and get more work done maybe because at home they have their family and other responsibilities.
Yeah, I've heard that too. I think I'm even dealing with this whole I miss a work environment. I just miss, like, I like people working and they don't have to talk to me, but I like that they're there. So sometimes I live in an apartment complex where they have little areas you can sit and work, and I'll just sit and work there. I don't have to talk to you. I just like knowing that you're around. It's just nice and helpful. So I've heard that as well. And some folks, they look forward to going to the office because they were able to have some time away. And then vice versa. Some people, they're like, I can't wait to go to my home office to get a break from in-office life. So I think there's kind of a dual, folks kind of like both. They like the option. Any other thoughts before we keep going?
Just thinking in terms of successes, I mean, the last team that I was working on, it was global, so I don't want to like step away from a Denver or Colorado specific thing, but as such, the hybrid work environment allowed us to be able to select people for the team from literally around the world, and also one thing, one of the tasks that we had as like a kind of a consultant group was to do like pretty complex workshops with participants from around the world at much shorter notice than we would have if we had been putting together those workshops in person. And it was a massive like innovation for an organization that often was having those workshops happen in person, and so you could only really do a couple of them a year because it involved a lot of travel and lodging and massive expenses. And we were able to kind of spread some of these workshops out in clever ways to basically make sure that we were able to gather the information and get the decisions that we needed to from that without having to be locked into a specific time. That said, we did have to hybridize that and get together every once in a while so that we could really kind of sit all in a room for a couple of days and really be able to get some forward work on that to mitigate the downsides of all being independently, living off in our own worlds.
Yeah. And the logistics too.
Yeah, exactly. So.
Yeah, that's incredible. And that's a lot of times when I tell my clients about the cool thing about hybrid and remote is you're able to open up a candidate pool that you maybe never really looked at beforehand because they don't live either in your state or what have you. So I always tell them too, when it comes from, we're not talking about hiring, but when you think about hiring, you can also think about how that opens up that candidate pool from different places you never would have thought of. So thanks for bringing that success. I love it.
We did end up having to manage a little bit of the cliquishness of like the Western Hemisphere people versus the Eastern Hemisphere people because there was only so much time overlap. So I ended up talking with the Canadian and the South American in the mix more often than I did with the woman from Senegal and from Geneva because time zones. But anyway, that's back off of successes and the problems again.
But I love it. It's helpful because I think either way you look at it, whether it's in person or it's virtual, there's still going to be a lot of logistics. It's just different logistics to think about, right? I mean, I've had to do staff retreats in person, and the logistics to do an in-person retreat is very similar to a virtual one. It's just how you're executing is going to be a little bit different. And maybe the planning, like I feel like in person, with virtual, I feel like there's a little bit more control on things versus in person. Like we had to change rooms, right? We had to be more flexible, I think. So either way, it can be done. It's just looking at the planning a little bit differently. Awesome. what y'all really want is 5 ways to increase employee engagement. So here, there's different ways to go about this. I'm going to start on the other side where it says flexibility and work-life balance. I mean, this is the reason why a lot of staff love a hybrid work environment. They want flexibility. They want to be able to work from home. They want to be able to be with their fur babies and real babies. That's really, I would say, the biggest benefit to a hybrid work environment that I hear from staff all of the time. Also, I think it's great to look at different ways of developing professionally with your staff. You can get even more creative. Some of my clients, they find a platform that can do a lot of virtual workshops on different topics depending on their role. So they've invested into a platform that can do a lot of these things in-house for them. They still do trainings and retreats. They may do a hybrid version. They may do part of it in person and part of it virtual. So they get really creative in ways they can do the professional development part of increasing engagement. Also, employee recognition programs. I think it's really important that you take time to appreciate your staff, show them that they're valued, and getting creative in how you do that. And that depends on where you work. So I could give you suggestions, but it really depends on where you work, what's the culture, and what staff want, right? So I won't go down that rabbit hole, but I think that's really important to look at how you're recognizing your staff. And Rachel, can you scroll down just a little bit again with the fancy PowerPoint? Wellness initiatives. I do a training about holistic wellness in the workplace, and I'm actually going to be doing a different one about how to implement wellness initiatives in the workplace. But this is a really big one. I talk to a lot of staff where maybe they're new on this wellness journey and they just want different activities. So maybe you bring in an instructor to talk about somatic work. Maybe you bring in another instructor to talk about yoga and breath work. It depends on your organization and your company, but a lot of staff, it's one thing to talk about wellness, it's one thing to practice wellness. So I think that those kind of initiatives are great to weave into your employee engagement activities. And then also regular feedback and check-ins. What do they like, what do they not like, and what do they want more of? You're not going to figure that out unless you ask. So whether you do surveys for feedback, whether you just go up to them and ask, I think it's going to be really important. That's going to help you take your employee engagement efforts even further. Oh, and then I have a little note you can't see because it's so small. I talk about inclusive leadership. For a lot of this to take place and be successful, it starts with leadership too. So if they are about inclusivity, if they are about operating in that way, awesome, because that's the key to foster an inclusive work environment. So I'm not going to read this to you, but I hope that you were able to come up with or get the ball rolling and thinking of different ways to increase employee engagement with your teams. I hope that you understand the role of equity and inclusion when you are designing these efforts. And then finally, understanding that this is going to be an ongoing journey. We're going to be together figuring out how we're going to do this in virtual land and also in person. But for me, it's about the purpose and intent. And so the question I'm going to leave you with is how will you implement these strategies in your organization, and what are the next steps forward? So I hope that you enjoyed today's session. I have a little quote. I love quotes, and I love Dolly Parton. So she says, "We cannot direct the wind, but we can adjust the sails." So that's kind of what I want to leave you with. Like, it's up to you on how you want to do this. And as long as you keep the staff in the forefront, I think that you can, get the ball rolling and coming up with different strategies when you're looking at employee engagement. So thank you very much. I appreciate you all.
Plenty of time for questions? Does anybody have any
Yes. Questions, insights, thoughts, ahas? Where your
But it's probably not going to apply to people in this room.
Thank you.
So again, like I just said, I don't know if this will apply to anyone in this room, but for a company that maybe has perception that this is just a checkbox, right? Like the employee rewards is a pizza party that you have to come on your own time for, or there's surveys, but what they're going to do is take you aside and tell you to knock it off once they get your survey, or there's this perception, right? Yes. So how do you rebuild trust if you want to be the people in this room, but you maybe have the perception of what I was just describing?
Yeah, we don't have a lot of time, but I will say rebuilding trust is a whole journey and process for any organization or company. And I have a whole thing about it that I won't go into. But It requires spending time getting to know your staff in a different way and breaking down that perception. Like HR, like I do HR consulting, there's a whole perception of who we are. And that's, I have to deal with every time I meet with a client or I meet their staff. They already think, oh my gosh, she's going to get me in trouble, right? And I'm not. That's not what I'm here for. And I have to always kind of start with, like, let's just get to know one another. Let me tell you what I do. Let me learn about what you do, and why we are here. Let's kind of have a reframe. And that just requires a lot of time and effort to do. But there's ways that you can. I'm not going to give you a whole spiel of how and why. We don't have that kind of time. But it just requires spending time really just talking with them and saying, hey, this is why we're doing this. This is our intention. I understand that there is this perception, or in a past work environment, that's maybe how you have been treated and received. This is what we're trying to do here. Yeah. Yeah. Questions, thoughts, ahas? Can you pass the mic that way?
Let's see how to say this. We're a small organization and we're mostly introverted, analytical kinds of people. And I guess what I've seen is that when there's somebody on the team who's not like that, who is a little bit of just more outgoing and cheerful, there's more engagement. But we're like, I guess, how do you deal with that in an environment like that where most people, including me, are analytical and introverted?
Yeah. And I think you're cheerful. Because you can be introverted and cheerful.
Yes, that's true. But
yeah. No, I just wanted to tease you about that.
quietly cheerful.
Yeah, quietly cheerful. Like, for instance, I'll give you an example. People think I'm very extroverted because how I am. But really, I'm very introverted. I like to be alone when I want to decompress. And so I think that it's being kind of creative and figuring out what are some things that maybe the introverted folks on the team would like to enjoy. They're part of the group, but they still get to have that spaciousness that they need. Or asking them, like, hey, I got some different ideas that I want to do. What are your thoughts on this? Or what are some ideas that maybe you have that you would like to do? Like, I had this one team that was very similar, but they had this obsession of wanting to go to the dog park with their dogs. They don't want to hang out with everybody. They just want to bring their dog, see their coworker's dog, and have a good time, and have a set like appointment for this when this is going to happen. Maybe it's on a Saturday morning or it's after work. And they did it and they had a great time. Did they sit there and have food and drinks and talk? No, but they got to know each other and at least get to know their fur babies. And that was an activity that they really kept telling me in our one-on-ones that they wanted to do. And so I talked to the employer about it. So you never know. They may have suggestions and ideas that maybe we haven't really thought about because we haven't talked about it together. Just because someone's really outgoing and engaged doesn't mean that the other folks that are introverted still can't be engaged. It's just kind of figuring out what is more in alignment with them that's more comfortable. So feedback. Yeah. Did you have something?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you tell me what you think about mandatory versus optional events, meetings, whatever? Yeah.
Yeah. Like I said about the mandatory, like keeping the cameras on, to me it's the same thing. People will go. Will they enjoy it? And also, what's the purpose behind it? Because in HR land, there's some things that are mandatory. But again, how can you get folks to understand like the purpose, intent, and the why of what you're doing? So I think that's one thing. If it's mandatory because it has to be, it's a legal thing, it's a town hall, it's some updates and announcements, great. Again, let them know the why of why it's mandatory and what's going to be covered. I think people like to know what's happening in advance. And then I like optional. I think just folks like to opt in, but there's also caveats with optional, right? They may not show up. So I think it just kind of depends, and it's going to be an experiment. Like, see what happens when you make certain things mandatory, when you make things optional, and then rinse, repeat, and then gather feedback on their experience. Good questions. Any other thoughts? We're doing great on time. I thought I was going to go over. Seriously, I did.
So, do you think it would be a good idea to have a mandatory choose one of 3 optional?
Oh, like there's 3 options for employee engagement and they have to pick one?
Like, say you have a pretty big company, maybe like a book club, a sport, and an art club or something, and then you have to choose one, but you got to choose one of the 3.
I say go for it and see what happens. Collect feedback. I'm always going to go back to data. I'm like, okay, when you did it, what happened, and what people liked, what they didn't like. I think people like the illusion of choice, and I don't like to say the illusion, but it is. You're making them choose something, and I'd rather them have a choice in what they're going to participate in than not.
Yeah.
So try it and see what happens.
On that topic, like something I've found to be really quite useful in getting over the hump of having people like eye-rollingly show up to a mandatory meeting, is and it seems really basic, but often I find that it gets forgotten, is like acknowledging that these people have busy things that they want to do and they're interested in doing and they feel like you're stopping them from doing. So acknowledging what their needs are,
Yes.
And what they've expressed, and maybe even just through their own
Yes.
expressions, but then also communicating what your needs are, from a management or an organizational, from an information sharing perspective, because it's not just like, beyond I need to give you this information, but just like kind of integrating, what your needs, because I think I've found that if you can put people in a position of being able to like provide something to you,
Yes.
rather other than just their raw presence and
Yes.
in the whole thing, then they're much happier to oblige
Yeah.
in that sense. Be like, oh, I'm helping out this person who has called me into this meeting by showing up to this meeting, and every meeting will have its own type of communication for that. But then the trick is, of course, to not be wasteful or disrespectful in the midst of that, and then tricking them into getting there, and then all of a sudden you
It's something
blow
else.
2 hours of their time
Yes.
on something that they don't appreciate. But if you can actually have their presence meet the need that you express, then often there's a willingness. So
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think also, I think folks want to just know that their time is valued. So if you respect their time and let them know, like, hey, I know you're busy, I know you're working on things. Here's what we're gonna do in this amount of time, and stick to it. I think people will go, okay, awesome. I see that this is related to whatever. It could be a new initiative, a new program, or just giving updates on what's happening in the org. They understand, okay, this is why I'm needed to be here, and it's not just a waste of my time. Thank you for speaking to that. Any other questions and thoughts? Do we feel complete? I get the look of like, yes, we do feel complete. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Hope you enjoyed it. I'm trying to figure out how to get this uploaded so you all can get a copy of it if you want. It's just a little too big to upload where we're supposed to upload our documents, so hopefully stay tuned. And if you're on Hoova, I know, it's too big. Yeah. So I'm telling you, when I said fancy, I wasn't kidding. But either way, I'll figure out how to get it to all of you all. Even if I have to, if you're on Hoova and you came here and you marked attended, I'll reach out to you. If not, please make sure you are in the attendees, and I'll figure out how to give you a copy of the slide deck with resources for you to look back to. So, thank you. Have a good rest of your day, my dears.
Wait, one thing though.
Yeah.
I didn't actually hear like who you are.
Oh yeah, I didn't do any of that, did I? I did go, oh, there's a slide. So my name is Otisa Eads. I'm an HR and systems strategist consultant. I work with nonprofit small business owners. I do consulting projects, staff retreats, board retreats, coaching. I just like to help folks navigate HR operations and systems, and employee engagement. So let me know if you need anything, or if you want to holler at me and say, hey, you're cool. Scan that QR code and you can find different ways to stay in touch with me. Thank you.